Welcome to today's episode. We're diving into the recent major changes announced by U.S. Army Cadet Command, the rebalance and optimization of senior ROTC programs, which will impact multiple host battalions and even eliminate standalone 1st Brigade, which used to encompass the senior military colleges. We've been seeing reaction from parents, alumni, current cadets all across the country. I'm joined today by Lieutenant Colonel John Bautch, the former recruiting operations officer at Vanderbilt University and a colleague of mine at the ROTC Scholarship Consulting. And John, it's great to have you on here today. This is your first podcast to YouTube, and I can't think of a better guy that I want to riff on this subject with, man.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of your team. And yes, it's exciting times all around.
Yeah, excitement to say the least, and certainly consternation from people who are affected by this. And we're going to try to give you our best insights on this. Obviously, this is something very new. It was announced on June 27th on the Army.mil website by the Public Affairs Officer of the Cadet Command. But I'll just go ahead and summarize quickly, John, what this optimization and rebalance and optimization is, what we're talking about here. I think this is the biggest change in U.S. Army Cadet Command in my memory. I mean, some of the other things that I remember would be when the introduction of civilian contractors in around 2002 or 3, and then the move to full tuition scholarships in the 08 timeframe. But this realignment is, I'd say, even bigger than that. So I think it's definitely a big change here. So let me go ahead and just talk about some of the highlights of this. What we have is there's a U.S. Army Transformation Initiative. Cadet Command was asked to implement strategic rebalance and optimization of senior ROTC programs. There was a reduction in Department of Defense through the Deferred Resignation Program, and Cadet Command reduced its civilian workforce by around 170 positions, or about 12% of that force. That then spurred U.S. Army Cadet Command looking at their footprint to see where there could be economies made, right, in order to make it more efficient, right? So when you eliminate a civilian workforce, you're eliminating recruiting operations officers, like what you were at Vanderbilt, human resources assistants, supply techs, and those are key positions for host programs. A host program is one that has a professor of military science, a senior military instructor, and other types of civilians that support this program. With the reduction, as well as the cost savings under the new administration, and then this is happening throughout the Army, the U.S. Army Cadet Command had to go ahead and do this look, right, to reduce the footprint, right? This is going to have a significant impact on a number of programs, right? So what I want to do is kind of give a few definitions here. The first definition is a host unit. That's a senior ROTC program located at an institution with a formal agreement by the Secretary of the Army. Cadets attend training and classes on their home campus. The institution is staffed with full-time ROTC personnel. The second definition is an extension unit. That's a senior ROTC program linked to a host institution, but located on a separate campus. Cadets take ROTC courses at their own institution with full-time cadre assigned on the campus. And finally, there's a Crosstown agreement or Crosstown program, which is an institution which allows students to enroll in ROTC courses hosted at either a host or an extension unit, and cadets travel for their training rather than having full-time ROTC cadre at their home institution. So institutions or universities have been downsized in all three of these areas here, right? The first one is, and then of course there was an inactivation of a ROTC brigade that has usually, what is it, John? About how many programs are usually in a brigade?
It can vary geographically. I think it's probably at least 25 to 40 different programs,
right,
and definitely geographically vary between the West Coast, the middle of the country, and the East Coast.
Right.
All generally, it's a very vast mixture of, apart from what the 1st Brigade had with the senior military colleges, is that very diverse group of major public, major private, and then also middle of the road or middle performing and middle-sized programs.
Right. What's happening is the 1st Brigade at Fort Knox is being inactivated. We go down from 8 brigades to 7 brigades. The senior military colleges like Norwich, Virginia Military Institute, Citadel are being then brought under kind of geographic brigades. So not really a big deal there. But let's go ahead and go back to kind of what we're talking about with these hosts and crosstown agreements. So they're going to be inactivating 10 host programs, meaning these institutions will no longer have an affiliation with Army ROTC. 10 programs, and we're going to give you the link to this list of programs that are inactivated. These are host institutions which will no longer have an affiliation with ROTC. Here is Cal Poly, California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo, University of Northern Iowa, Western Illinois University, Truman State University, Elizabeth City State University, St. Augustine's University, Clarkson University, John Carroll University, University of Wisconsin Oshkosh, and West Virginia State University. So those are 10 hosts being inactivated. There's going to be 40. So let's move on to extension, which means that these institutions, host programs, reclassifying to extension units. So there's 40 of those, which means that these institutions will retain cadre on their campus and cadets will continue receiving training and education there, but the program will merge administrative and logistics support with the retained host unit. So this is 40. So this is perhaps less impactful to the cadets on campus. They'll still have cadre on the campus, but they lose their host status. So this has, I think, more of an impact on alumni, on the host institution, on the university itself, losing that kind of designation as a host program. And there's a bunch of ones here, but several of the ones that jumped out at me, some significant like prestige universities that are losing their host status. What jumped out at me, John, was Tulane, Duke. I was shocked with Duke. Wake Forest, Xavier, which is a great program, Memphis, University of Memphis. I know I'm missing a few more. I mean, there's 40 of them here, but those are the ones that jump out at me right away. What do you think? What jumps out at you with this list of 40?
The very first gut feeling I have personally and professionally is I can't really tell the full rhyme and reason of what was driving one school versus another, because it looks to me, it's a hybrid filter, if you will, hybrid filters of mission performance, as well as perhaps even the cost of some of these schools. But in the case of Memphis, for example, or Tennessee Tech University, two Tennessee schools, both public universities. So I think some of it also is even geography as well, is that they've existed, but I think there may have been some discussions for quite some time about whether you want to keep one program versus another. And I'm very familiar with Xavier University in that while Vandy was my last school as a recruiting operations officer, my very first school was the University of Cincinnati, just down the road from Xavier. I believe that whether from geography, from cost, from placement, this is a representation of Cadet Command looking at how are we represented in each state? How are we represented in each region of each state? And I think it's also, they're now pointing out and they are filtering out that there are some areas of each of the states that are just overrepresented. They have too many programs, and it's just a matter of then we've got to start doing something to address being overrepresented to perhaps allow for more dollars to flow into other programs with these changes.
Yeah, that makes sense, Sean. I mean, a lot of this really is legacy based on population shifts that have been happening in the country. It reminds me of pro football, right? You've got pro football teams in Cincinnati, Ohio, or Pittsburgh that have less than 1 million population. And then you're in Southern California here in San Diego, for example, we don't have a team down here, and we've got well over the population of like, say, a Cincinnati or a Pittsburgh or something like that. So yeah, you take a look and see that the populations have shifted to other parts of the country. Some of these programs are right next to each other, like we're talking about Xavier and Cincinnati are down the street from each other. You take a look at Duke, it's still being manned, right? It's going to be an extension, but you've got UNC and University of North Carolina State that can support that program. You take a look at just a lot of these is kind of what you're talking about, demographics, but you're also talking about geography and being able to support these programs better at one university rather than having to have two. Do you really need two host programs in Cincinnati? Questions like that, I think that Cadet Command has looked at that we can talk about a little bit more.
Sure.
So let me move on to hosts. So the next one is host classifying as crosstown relationships, meaning that these hosts will no longer host cadre members on their campus, but cadets will have the option. So this is a host that's been downgraded, not to a extension unit, but this is a host that is being completely eliminated with cadre on campus. So there's 6 of these that are in play here, which is, I'll name the 6 since there's only 6, is Southern University and A&M College in Louisiana, Eastern Michigan University, Niagara University, which I'm assuming Canisius will be the one that will, Central State University in Ohio, University of Richmond, that's a shocker there to me, and Carson Newman University. So they've put the screws to these hosts. They're no longer even, it's not as bad as eliminating them, but they're pretty much getting rid of the cadre on those campuses.
Well, and it is where there's a message.
Okay, and then the extension units being inactivated, number 9. This is where there's 9 campuses where these institutions will no longer have an affiliation with Army ROTC. So they used to be manned. Now they're not going to be manned anymore. So there's 9 of those. You no longer can do ROTC on that campus, from what I understand. If a school doesn't have an affiliation with Army ROTC, that you can't be an ROTC cadet on that campus. And then finally, an extension unit reclassifying to crosstown relationships, meaning that they will no longer host cadre on campus, but cadets will have the option to continue the Army ROTC program while receiving training. That's 19 programs spread out throughout the country. So big changes here to ROTC overall. So John, let's kind of back up a little bit and start with the big picture. What's driving the force? I know there's this force behind the ROTC rebalances. Can you give me a little bit more thoughts on that? What's kind of driving? I know you said geography. You talked about efficiencies and things like that. What else can you think of that's kind of driving this for Cadet Command?
I truly believe that the deeper strategic reasons is that I think the Army has been looking at, as it applies to the production of new officers to the Army and even the existing Army officer corps, I think we ran into a situation where we had been overproducing Army officers. Some of the world events going on, it allowed for overcommissioning, if you will. That extra force was needed, probably largely around Operation Enduring Freedom or even Iraqi freedom and things like that. But once major conflicts subside, then there is really looking at, are we bringing too many officers online? One of the things in talking and conversations with Cadet Command that I'd had was the length of time it was taking for brand new lieutenants to get to their BOLIC, Basic Officer Leadership Course branch courses. It was taking longer because the schoolhouse couldn't really support the numbers of actual lieutenants. With the new administration, with the deferred resignation program, with DOGE, if you will, looking at the Department of Defense, and then even again cascading down to the Army, is that this was a moment where Cadet Command had to look and say, okay, we're not going to have the luxury of the budgets that we've had in the past, but we will still be required to produce a requisite number of officers. And now we have to take a harder look at where the changes have occurred. Is that for some of those schools, deep down inside, it's probably not a surprise. It is a surprise overall, especially when you're talking major universities and Cadet Command. We know Cadet Command wants to be in major universities because that's where you've got great academics, great universities merged with great ROTC programs. But I think it was its efficiencies, its production of officers, its geography. And I think it's, as we understand, this is a major change for Cadet Command. hopefully we won't have many major changes like this, because it's good to go ahead and get things leveled. But it is something that I think it's no surprise, honestly.
Yeah, that's a really good point, John. I mean, when we look at, you're kind of alluding to this long overdue move here. I think they've been wanting to do this for years, and that this is just the opportunity to do it. There's a lot of inefficiencies built into the system. Not to throw Duke under the bus, but I remember in previous years, Duke having really low commissioning numbers and then questioning why you have a host program at Duke when the efficiencies can be there. And obviously they don't want to leave a prestigious university like Duke, but you got to look at the numbers, you got to look at the footprint of where they're located, if they could be supported by other schools. So you got to look at those things too. But that's a great point about how we're in a different Army now, and we can't afford to have lieutenants waiting, new ROTC lieutenants waiting a year for the basic officer leadership course and just sitting around when you don't have the capacity in the schoolhouse to train these people, get them through the system. You know what I mean?
We both remember when dinosaurs ruled the earth. After each of our commissionings, we moved pretty fast.
Yeah, we didn't.
We didn't sit around.
So given these ones with the closure of the hosts, obviously the biggest ones affected are the hosts that are closing that aren't even going to be manned as a partnership, or these programs aren't even going to be affiliated with ROTC anymore. So let's take, for example, Clarkson University, way up in upstate New York in the middle of the frozen tundra. You got cadets up there on scholarship, MS2, 3, and 4, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors now that are on scholarship. I know that Army ROTC has produced an operations order on this, but any speculation on what is going to happen to those cadets that are in that program, like let's just say a Clarkson MS2 on scholarship?
What I can see so far in my conversations with existing recruiting operations officers out in the field is the signs are pointing to one of the options that will be left for an existing contracted cadet will be to walk away from their contract. Mm-hmm. That'll be the first gut check for many of the cadets, is that without hesitation, existing contract cadets, most especially under scholarship, are going to be given options that they got to go somewhere else. Now, an underlying important administrative step is, from a timing standpoint, with admissions, with every other school you're going to be trying to move to, a big challenge. But I think the cadet command is going to accept that also there's going to be moments where they're going to have cadets walking away. Now, if you are further down the road as a senior or a junior, wow, that's really something to have to swallow. But also, I think even from a mission production standpoint, it could be something that you're going to see what you thought you had for existing numbers. And all of a sudden, based on this change, you're discovering that you're seeing students walk away. None of us want to see cadets walk away. This is something where we want to hope that every contract cadet does persevere, does decide that they want to press on in the midst of this change. But it could be something where I'm the most concerned about the fact that it's the 3rd of July. This message came out the end of June. There's no cadets on campus right now. They're all off, some busier than others with cadet summer training, but you don't have all of your cadets on one place. It's forcing all those programs, the host programs, or whichever's happening. There's even messaging going on with programs that are not affected because cadets will be trying to reach out to their cadre. It doesn't look like we're affected, but is what's going on and how does it, or most importantly, parents doing the same. There's a lot of necessary communications that are going on. This is not the best time of year to have this all going on, but it is going on at this time.
The question might be is why can't like Clarkson just teach out their MS2s, 3s, and 4s for the next 3 years? And the reason is because, that MS2 that becomes an MS4 has no cadets to lead. Yeah, so according to the op board and the operations order and the press release, this is supposed to begin the summer of 2026, so this next year. So MS4s aren't going to be affected. They're going to graduate and commission. So what we're talking really about here are MS3 and 2 cadets, right? So Clarkson shuts down and you've got a rising MS4 cadets and MS3 cadets, right? I think for those two groups, right, they're going to, like you say, they're going to be given the option of being able to transfer their scholarship to another school, or get out of their contract. But they're not going to, I would be surprised if they allow them to continue at Clarkson just with 2 classes because of the leadership responsibilities that they need with MS 1 and 2 cadets to build their leadership capabilities. It's going to be a tough one for schools like Clarkson. Another question, John, about this is obviously this affects alumni. This affects the host program. The host program had an agreement with the Secretary of the Army. We leave like a place like Duke. We leave a place like Clarkson. Certainly if the host is abandoned and it's not to become a crosstown agreement. I mean, Cadet Command's hesitant to do this because obviously we've established oftentimes very historic relationships with some of these schools, right?
Absolutely. Those relationships were established by the professor of military science, by the senior military science director, by the recruiting operations officer. What I've seen in past years when Cadet Command has tried to make moves similar to what they're doing in this current action is that I've seen Cadet Command blocked by legislative aides and legislative liaisons, and the universities kind of come back and react to these changes because so much time has been taken in making sure that a university is interested, a university is invested in supporting a program. And this is something where universities, all of these changes and the universities that are affected, the universities have personal feelings and professional feelings about these changes because they believed that they were putting a good faith effort in. What happens many times is there's going to be a professor of military science or recruiting operations officer or both of them. They're going to have to explain to their universities, why have we been identified? The university president or university provost going, I thought we were doing just fine. And those universities do they're thinking at several different levels. They're thinking from aspects of, these are our students as cadets. This was a partnership that we've had established, that we've grown, that we've strengthened. And now all of a sudden, poof.
I mean, it's interesting because the commanding general of Cadet Command said these changes are made and could possibly be reversibility in the future. You go back to Duke, hat in hand 5 years later and going like, hey, we'd like to establish a host again. So you break trust with these universities. And some of these universities, I think of like places like Akron and Toledo, University of Toledo, that gave full room and board and would cover the first year tuition on a 3-year scholarship. And I mean, really went above and beyond. Are they going to still be willing to do that as a crosstown versus a host? A lot of these schools have been prideful of their ROTC program, but literally put their money where their mouth was and gave additional incentives to these cadets. So, I mean, this is going to hurt. You can think of what the impact is going to be to like an Xavier or a Toledo or a Akron that were just super supportive of ROTC cadets.
Tremendously supportive, and with sincere, all due respect to the Command General of Cadet Command, to talk about a reversibility is that what Army ROTC probably at the command level at Fort Knox forgets is that those university senior leaders, they stay around for decades. ROTC cadre changes out. Yes, in my 20 years as a recruiting operations officer across Cincinnati, Middle Tennessee State, and Vanderbilt, okay, that's significant, but that was 3 different schools. Those universities have long memories, and perhaps maybe not the senior leader that was affected in 2025, and you look beyond to 2030, 2035, et cetera. But those universities don't forget. It forces who will be the representative from the Army and from Army ROTC that will come back with hat in hand to Tulane or to Xavier, is that it's going to take a brigade commander along with a full colonel brigade commander, or in some cases, I think some of the major universities, you'll see the cadet commanding general, the one-star general, or perhaps it'll be elevated back to a 2-star command. But that level of senior executive on the Army side will have to approach the senior executives of the leadership of some of these universities, because I've seen for myself when there's been twists and turns with the schools that I've served at. And again, there's all of the above board official communications, and there is a tremendous amount of offline desk side conversations with university presidents, university provosts,
you and I have been in these conversations sometimes at some of these things, and we know some of the pain points there that are involved. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of what could be a bug on the wall with some of these conversations that are going to be taking place in the coming weeks with this. John, what do you think cadets are losing from like a place like Duke when they go to a crosstown? In other words, when they lose a lot of their infrastructure, is it in your opinion, is it less of a experience that they get when they move from a host to a Duke has got a couple of cadre on campus, and then most of their stuff is going on there, but it's kind of a reduced cadre. Is it a less of a experience, do you think, rather than being in a host?
I have a personal and professional bias, is that I've always spoken with high school students about, or at least made sure that they understood, what does a host bring you for support structure? What does an extension center? What does a crosstown school? So it was trying to educate students and parents about that. But my own bias is that when you have been at a host and you're just accustomed to all the things of having that professor of military science available, having the logistics technician, having the recruiting operations officer example, is that it's all right there for you. When programs are transformed and transitioned, cadre and programs will have to help cadets in this transition to know that they can still access the things they need in cadre and resources, etc., but it won't be exactly the same. This change will require that cadets and their families ask a whole lot of questions about, what's changing, what happens, what's different that I have to become accustomed to in this transition.
First person at Xavier or at Akron are going to realize, they're not going to be able to walk into the ROTC program and see their recruiting operations officer get their question answered immediately by the colonel. They're going to have less exposure to the professor of military science, probably, so I think there's going to be those experiences. Now, that's not to take away that a lot of cadets come from crosstown schools, and they produce well, but I think it's definitely going to be visible to cadets that are used to kind of the creature comforts that come with being a host program, as you might say. And then the same that are going from crosstown to just having unmanned campuses. That's going to be, I think, another big one. You take a look at a place like University of Chicago that had a manned campus. And now what that means, the cadre goes to the campus on some of the weekdays and maybe does some physical fitness training. That means that those people in January, when there's a foot of snow in Chicago, have to get in their cars and drive to University of Illinois, Chicago, right, to do their ROTC ads. So that's, I think, people that are in the crosstown that are used to having 2 or 3 cadre on their campus, maybe with a HRA, human resource assistant, don't have anybody now. And so
I think the pain and the strain, if you will, is going to be all varied across. What are we actually talking about in terms of the distance between the new host, right. Because there's in Tennessee, for example, you're looking at a driving distance now for some programs where it's going to be an hour's drive. Right. Now, the very first pain point, if you will, with this transition is now the professor of military science, who is now the host of multiple schools or has added 1 or 2 major schools, now is going to be traveling, and now their entire schedule now has flipped into, I'm just at my host. I might visit my crosstowns depending on where they're located. If I have crosstowns, cadre will be more on the road. Cadets will be more on the road. And it is the practical thing. Born and raised in Wisconsin, knowing what the weather's like, is that it's some of the cadets that I've had the great pleasure of working with managed late into their college life not to have a car at all. So now cadets are very resourceful. They start to who's got a car and Who can we start to go here? I'll give you some money I'll Venmo you some money for gas. Hey, here's our schedule. What's your schedule? But again, it's a change where somebody says, okay, now all the things I've been comfortable having, I no longer have, or I've now been told here is the glide path until I'm not going to have what I've been normally accustomed to having. If you're talking about a military science level 2 sophomore, only in they're just starting their second year of college. The juniors and seniors, a little bit more experienced, but again, it's something that they'll have to come to grips with.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, they're going to have to make a decision on whether or not that, and I think that's going to have to, like you were telling with the host going to Crosstown, just with the partnership relationship, they're going to have to make a decision about distance, about whether or not it's worth it anymore to do that. And then I think that was in some part what was driving the host to a place like Clarkson, where it's not realistic to make them a crosstown, because where do they crosstown to? Syracuse or Siena? That's like a 5-6 hour drive. So they'd be better off joining the Canadian Army than joining the U.S. Army. So I think a lot of love for the people up at Clarkson, but you've got the geographic concerns I think that they had to look at there at Clarkson,
I think the one thing that we have to remember in this entire occurrence right now is that this was not the result of the quality of a university or a college in any form or fashion. This is more of a case of the ROTC portion of that university, whether as a host or an extension or a crosstown, and going, hey, we're just going to eliminate completely, or we're going to adjust your relationship, is that those, again, and what's disconcerting to university officials and to students in ROTC and parents is the ROTC program has existed for decades at Clarkson. Why all of a sudden now is it now not advantageous to have the program at Clarkson? And again, some of it will be fully discussed. Will it be fully discussed? Probably not, because there's just too much that in terms of trying to tell cadets and university officials and parents how sausage is made in the Army or in Army ROTC, and how, again, budgets and other demands are.
Great point. Do you think this is probably the end of changes? I think probably they're not going to do another hard reset on this. I think this was their one go big or go home kind of a moment that they had here with ROTC. Do you think this move was long overdue, but do you think some good might come out of this regarding innovation, collaboration, cost savings, about not just Cadet Command, but larger Army? I mean, if you're eliminating 40 hosts, or rather 50 hosts program or whatever it is, not eliminating, but either changing their status, you've now got 50 lieutenant colonels going back into the force. You've got 50 master sergeants going back into the force. One of the things I remember the CG Cadet Command commanding general talking about is big Army hated to lose 273 lieutenant colonels or senior majors going to ROTC, which is a big kind of take out of the senior force. There's silver linings to this thing. Would you agree?
I would agree. The one thing I struggle with in watching this change, and I am very much enjoying where I am right now watching the change, as you can well imagine. And again, we both go back to our own experiences and start to have our own feelings of the things that have happened in the Army and changes and such. The thing I struggle with is that there should be collaborations and efficiencies that come out of this for the betterment of the programs that are continuing to exist, continuing to serve cadets. What I'm the most nervous about is the overall human nature of when changes like this occur. You can see a lot of programs and a lot of the existing leadership at schools, you can see them kind of just close ranks and go, okay, we got to make sure we can take care of ourselves. Because from a training collaboration standpoint, that always exists as it applies to most schools. There are efficiencies when you bring together 2 or 3 or more schools for what they call joint field training exercise, for example, because You need to have more cadets when you're trying to do activities versus the cost of trying to make sure you're putting a training activity for one school. But the one thing that is on the mind of every recruiting operations officer who is a direct report to the professor of military science at any school is, how is this going to affect our recruiting mission? How is this going to affect us accomplishing our commissioning mission? Because they can talk about collaborations, but in the end, what happens and has to occur is, well, what's the bottom line? Are you going to be able to accomplish your commissioning mission?
Right.
And it's generally not a situation where an existing professor of military science or an existing recruiting operations officer is going to say, I'm sorry, all these changes is going to degrade our ability to accomplish the mission. I've seen many minor changes in cadet command, and in talking even with the existing recruiting operations officers that I know, probably spread out across 5 states, is that there are times when everyone is on the mountaintop. And then there's also times when we're all down in the valley. And this is a down in the valley moment where, yes, I believe brigades and cadet command at the 1-star level, they are going to force some programs to do more things together. But what is yet to be seen is, how are you going to incent programs to work with one another as it applies to the overall mission accomplishment? That's what recruiting operations officers live and die for every year. Have I accomplished the mission? And when you back it up, have I successfully, in concert with my professor of military science, gathered the requisite number of cadets that I need, scholarship or non-scholarship contract cadets, so I can accomplish the mission? Yes, I believe that every program that has been allowed to remain in host status, this is a moment for each and every one of them. And I've had conversations with existing host recruiting operations officer. I tell them, you are in a great opportunity. You have not been told to stand down. You are not losing your job. Yes, you're taking on some additional responsibilities. In many cases, it's, hey, you're just one person. You've got 2 hands, you got 1 brain, you got 2 sets of ears, but now you've got 2 different schools locations you have to begin to roll in your mind of, how am I going to serve more than just one school? What is good for us with ROTC Consulting is that we will help so many high school students and existing college students and existing contracted cadets to know how to ask the right questions at times about, because again, sometimes just the after effect of a change like that is it just shakes people's rhythms, and it shouldn't shake their rhythms for an indefinite period of time. But when it comes to being able to take care of students, this is a moment where you just kind of have to, just for all programs, they got to put their big boy, big girl pants on, and they've got to, they just have to. And I don't want to dishonor anybody's feelings. It's just that we still have to remember that there are students out there that still want our help, especially with this announcement. That's probably increased the communication channels that students are making to programs. No one's stupid. If someone's into an ROTC and they want to get into it, they're going to see that they've been dialing into social media platforms, and they just seen a major announcement from the Department of the Army. And the spokesman of the announcement is the commanding general, which means it's significant. It's not just it hasn't been delegated, but there are students that still need to be served. They will be served. They should be served. And that's my hope. And I know that we will be successful in serving students and serving parents. And I know that some of my work in concert with students will be just having to maybe shake a couple of recruiting operations officers, and that's okay. I think that's a good part of the process. I think that's just good to know is that it's going to be okay.
Yep. And it will be. I mean, we're well positioned, John, you and I, to give candidates kind of an unbiased perspective on this. I'm sure if they call different programs, they're going to get maybe a bias. Maybe it's going to give the slant of that particular school and their feelings about this. But I think that you and I are in positions to give people who are interested in the scholarship and interested in ROTC kind of a perspective on these changes and what it means, and things that they can think about if they're thinking about going to a host program that's been downgraded to a partnership program, we can give them perspectives on geography, distance to training, manning of cadre on campuses that they may not get elsewhere. So I think our mission here at ROTC Scholarship Consulting is really to be the leading non-governmental source for things going on with ROTC. And we provide that through our books, our courses, but also through one-on-one consulting that both you and I do for Army ROTC candidates here. So again, John, this is a pivotal moment for Army ROTC. It'll shape the officer corps for years to come. And thanks for breaking this down for us today. And I just wanted to leave you with any final thoughts on this.
The philosopher Heraclitus,
okay,
centuries ago said, there is nothing permanent in life except for change. You cannot step into a river and step out of a river and then step back into the river and be in the same place as a person or in the same place in the river. There is constant change. It's going to be okay. Students and parents, with our help, will know that they have to be fully cognizant of the schools that they're checking out. I have always believed in my heart, whether someone was ROTC scholarship interested or Academy interested, and yes, obviously we're Army centric, is that if you have had the passion or vision state of becoming an Army officer, it will occur. It will happen, no matter what goes on in the journey toward that. All will be well. This is a major change, but again, students and parents can still move forward with our assistance, and they will still be able to accomplish the things, and those students will accomplish the things they want to accomplish toward becoming Army officers. It's going to be okay. We're going to maintain a strong Army officer corps.
Yeah. And Army ROTC is a great organization. You and I wouldn't have been associated with an organization like Army ROTC for as long as we have if it wasn't a great organization. So they're going to take care of those cadets that are MS2 or MS3 cadets, meaning they're going to give them the option to transfer, to retain their full scholarship, probably be able to go to any college or university that in the ROTC system. It's going to be quite a change for those individuals, having to perhaps leave their friends at Clarkson University, for example, or other schools that are losing their host status. But Army ROTC is a great organization and will continue to take care of individuals as best they can, John. So thanks for coming on today, John, and giving your insights. I loved it.
My great pleasure.
Okay, we'll see you.
All right. Take care.